Hello, welcome back to Brickwall Pictures. Today I'm doing a Coen Brothers tier list. Make sure you check out the tier lists I've done for people like Jackie Chan, Jet Li, Donnie Yen, Park Chan-wook, Joon-ho Bong. I've done a bunch of them so far. Today I am doing the Coen Brothers. So let's get started with Joel Coen. He is the older Coen brother, and he is the one who has directorial credit on every single one of their movies. And I think for that, he gets the S tier. Now moving on to Ethan Coen. He is the younger brother, and some of the movies he has directorial credit. Other ones he only has writing and producing credit. So he's just a notch lower, but still pretty good. Ethan Coen's going in the A tier. So that's all. Thanks for watching my Coen Brothers tier list. Now, so I actually am going to rank all the Coen Brothers movies, and I do mean all of the Coen Brothers movies. I'm going through every single one. The Coen Brothers I would call collectively one of my favorite filmmakers. I love their movies, but I'm going to be ranking all their stuff because there is a whole lot of variance in quality. Starting off with their first film, Blood Simple. Now, with a lot of filmmakers, their first film can be kind of rocky or can look like a first film, but Blood Simple, I guess you can tell that it's a first film. Like in some ways, it maybe looks a little cheaper. It doesn't have quite as much of like the Coen Brothers style that all their other films have. There's no hint of like the dark comedy that's in pretty much every other Coen Brothers movie. This one's very serious. I would call it actually the most in line with No Country for Old Men. So it might not feel as much like a Coen Brothers movie, but I fucking love Blood Simple. It is so good. The climax of this film is so good. The big like action sequence at the end is one of the best in their entire filmmaking career. Blood Simple, I think, is great. I'm going to give it the A tier. I think they started with a bang. It might not be as on brand as some of their other films, but I really do think it's one of their best. It's one of the ones that I love to rewatch the most frequently. And I think most of their films are very rewatchable, by the way. Next up is No Country for Old Men. These are just in a randomized order, by the way. I just kind of threw them over there. No Country for Old Men is adapted from the Cormac McCarthy novel. It's a very faithful adaptation, by the way. If you've read the book, you know just how similar the movie is to it. The book is already pretty cinematic. The character of Anton Chigurh is just so good. Like one of the best film characters out there. One of the best film villains for sure, easily. Javier Bardem is excellent in the role. It was his big breakthrough with American audiences. He had already been doing great stuff in Spanish language films though, by the way. If you've only seen him in this, check out some of his older work. But the whole cast is great. Tommy Lee Jones is great. Kelly MacDonald is really good. Stephen Root's great in his tiny role. Woody Harrelson's good in his tiny role. And of course Josh Brolin is great as well. No Country for Old Men has some of the best direction out of really like any movie. I was going to say the Coen Brothers' career, but the direction is just so immaculate in No Country for Old Men. Everything is so precise. It is a fantastic film all around. The first couple of times I watched it, actually, I loved all of it except for the ending. The ending didn't work for me. Now when I watch it, which I've seen this movie probably a dozen times at this point, now I love the ending. It won me over. It just took a couple watches for me to get. It's an S-tier film, easily. No doubt, S tier. Now we have another Western. No Country for Old Men is kind of a neo-Western, whereas True Grit is just a straight-up Western. This one is, of course, a remake of the John Wayne True Grit. I'm not going to do any comparing to the original because I actually haven't seen the original. I like the Coen Brothers version. You hear the Coen Brothers doing a remake, you might think, you'd prefer the original stuff, but it still feels distinctly Coen Brothers. They added a lot of stuff. They changed a lot of stuff. Jeff Bridges, they're teaming up with him, who they haven't worked with since The Big Lebowski. He is great as Rooster Cogburn. He's so much fun. Josh Brolin's good again. Matt Damon is really good in it. And Haley Steinfeld is phenomenal in what was her breakthrough role, also her first film performance. She did a couple shorts. She'd been in a couple TV episodes. It was her first movie, and she knocked it out of the park. I hope she gets more roles like this, because outside of like Edge of 17 and a couple other projects, she hasn't had many great starring roles like True Grit to show everything she can do. I'm going to give it the B tier. You can make a case for A. It feels more like a B tier for me. To be clear, B tier is like an 8 out of 10 for me. That's what I'm kind of quantifying it as. Next up, we have Burn After Reading. Now, Burn After Reading proved a little bit divisive amongst Coen Brothers fans and just general audiences. I think the tide has shifted a little bit when it comes to the favor of Burn After Reading. It seemed to not get the best reception right away, but people have kind of come around on it. I think it's great. I think it's one of their funniest. It is so goddamn funny. Brad Pitt is allowed to go full goofball. Same with George Clooney. They go full goofy, which is great because big A-listers like them, a lot of their roles have them playing kind of like boring, bland characters. They're able to fully flex their comedic chops here, and they are so goddamn funny. So is Tilda Swinton and Frances McDormand. John Malkovich is so much fun in this movie. Oh, and you can't forget Richard Jenkins, too. Burn After Reading is really an ensemble comedy, and it's so much fun. The entire ride, especially that first watch when, you don't know what's happening, when you're seeing George Clooney, working in his basement, and you see him, building something, and he's a CIA guy, you're like, what is he building? When you get that reveal of what it is so funny. This movie, I had the big moment spoiled for me, unfortunately, because it would have been great. I won't spoil it here, but I'll just say it's the closet moment with Brad Pitt. I had that spoiled for me before I watched it, unfortunately. It's honestly one of the biggest movie spoiled moments that I've had. Burn After Reading is hilarious, and it ends in this message of kind of nothing really matters, this sort of randomness element that I love. I know a lot of people don't like that when a story doesn't add up to some big conclusive whole. It's something I personally really enjoy. Burn After Reading is another A-tier film for me. Now, Raising Arizona, which was their second feature film, kind of the polar opposite to Blood Simple, their debut film. Blood Simple was straight up dark, tense, thrilling. Raising Arizona is straight up super goofy, to cartoonish levels. You can see that in their next couple of films, and they refined a sort of blend of those two, of really dark and serious with this goofy kind of almost slapstick sometimes, dark humor, or just straight up cartoonish levels of comedy. They kind of fused those as their career went on. Raising Arizona is them at their goofiest extreme. Raising Arizona, very funny. I love John Goodman in it. Nicolas Cage gives a bizarre performance. Very funny. There are lots of great, highly quotable moments and memorable set pieces. I know a lot of people love Raising Arizona and hold it dearly. For me, it doesn't hit quite as hard as a lot of their other films. I still greatly enjoy it, and I'll rewatch it anytime I stumble across it. But I don't enjoy it quite as much. For me, it's a B tier. I know a lot of people who would put it in S tier and A tier. For me, just my personal opinion, I can't put it above B tier just on enjoyment level. Next up is Bridge of Spies, which they didn't direct, but they did write the screenplay to. And then it was directed by Steven Spielberg. Bridge of Spies, I do not like. It was a big Oscar contender the year it came out, and I would be surprised if anyone is still talking about it. It's just lame. It's not good. D or E tier. It's not awful. But I would put it, E tier for me. I don't really like Bridge of Spies, did not do anything for me. But now we're back to Coen Brothers directed territory with A Serious Man. A Serious Man seemed to fly a little under the radar when it first released. It didn't hit as big with audiences as a lot of Coen Brothers movies. It's kind of been done to death in the video essay scene. People have analyzed the crap out of this movie. But it is a lot more open to interpretation than a lot of Coen Brothers movies. I would say it's their most, except for possibly Barton Fink, the potential for analysis and different ways to interpret the film. It's really good. I'm a huge fan of Michael Stuhlbarg. I think he has been underrated for way too long. Even when he gets a starring role like this, he seems to not get talked about as much as the general film, but he's so good. And he's so good on things like the Fargo TV show and Boardwalk Empire, and in Call Me By Your Name, stuff like that. Such a good underrated actor. Fred Melamed is really good at it as well. It's a very fun film, but it's also really deep and provocative. Roger Deakins' cinematography is, of course, amazing, as usual. I love the way he uses the tilt-shift lens in the bar mitzvah scene. A Serious Man is A or B territory. I think it's A tier. It's a tough call. It's right in between in terms of how much I enjoy it. Quality-wise, it's definitely A tier, though. Next up is Miller's Crossing, which is probably not the favorite of a lot of Coen Brothers fans, but it's one of my favorite films. It's right up there with the very top of them. I might get pushback on this one, but for me, it is an S tier film. I love Miller's Crossing. I rewatch it a lot. It's full of just iconic moment after iconic moment. John Turturro is amazing in this movie. The Coen Brothers are the only filmmakers who know how to use John Turturro to his full ability. They've used him wonderfully throughout their entire body of work, really. Given him a big role in this, a great starring role in Barton Fink. One of very few starring roles he gets. He's usually playing second fiddle to somebody else. The entire cast of Miller's Crossing is so good. Albert Finney is so much fun in this movie. Gabriel Byrne is so good in this movie. Marcia Gay Harden is a great femme fatale kind of figure. You got your Coen Brothers, Steve Buscemi, cameo, you can trademark that, the Coen Brothers Steve Buscemi cameo, TM. His little cameo in this and in Barton Fink are like really iconic to me for some reason, even though they're just like tiny. Miller's Crossing has really great action sequences as well, even though like you can't really call it an action film, but it's one of my favorite gangster movies. Barry Sonnenfeld was their DP for this one, and he had this idea to shoot it all on overcast days, which seems like bizarre in theory of like, why would you need to shoot it all on overcast days specifically? But it really does add so much to like just the specific flair of this movie, the style of this movie, making it feel really unique. Next up is Hail Caesar, one of their more recent couple of movies. Hail Caesar took me a while to watch because it got very middling reviews, and I don't know, it just didn't interest me as much as a lot of their other movies. When I finally got around to seeing it, I enjoyed it, but it had no staying power. It was kind of like when it was over, I started immediately forgetting everything that happened in it, which is a little odd considering there are some big things that happen in it, like the whole Russian submarine thing. You know, that should make it memorable, but it just isn't. It kind of lacks a lot of staying power. It's very funny. It feels very vignette driven, like moving from a movie set to movie set on this like Hollywood backlot, Scarlett Johansson and the mermaids or whatever, and then we kind of move on to Channing Tatum in the bar with the dance number and stuff. It's like it's a lot of stuff that's fun in the moment, but it lacks a bit of cohesion for me. It's definitely not bad, but I'm going to put it in the C tier. Next up is Barton Fink. Great John Turturro starring role and an amazing John Goodman supporting role. I love John Goodman. He's one of my favorite actors, and I love the way the Coen Brothers use him. And I love the Coen Brothers Steve Buscemi TM cameo of him as Chet the bellhop. I love it. I don't know why I love it so much, but I love him as Chet. He's only got like 2 lines or whatever. I love those 2 lines. I love how he comes up out of the floor. I love how he stops the bell from ringing. It's just, I don't know, it's like so ingrained in my memory. Tony Shalhoub has a good supporting role as well. Barton Fink, it's so deep and profound on a script level. I love its portrayal of writer's block. I love the stuff like with the wallpaper peeling off, with the painting on the wall. It gets into some really profound territory. The first time I saw Barton Fink, I think a lot of it like went over my head. I think I was too young when I first watched it. I watched it in like middle school or whatever, and there was a lot I just didn't really get. I still enjoyed it back then, but I missed so much. Rewatching it like a couple years later, it really just hits me how much is there. It was their Palme d'Or winner at the Cannes Film Festival, the only time they've won that honor. I don't think it's their best film. It's not quite an S-tier film for me, but it is an A-tier film for sure. Just thinking about it makes me want to rewatch it, like right now. Next up is Paris Je t'aime, which is one that a lot of Coen Brothers fans might have skipped past because they didn't do the whole film. Paris Je t'aime is an anthology film with a bunch of different segments, like 30 different segments, little like short films that are each made by different filmmakers. Their segment, I think, is called Ladykillers or something like that. It's basically this short little vignette in a subway, and they brought Steve Buscemi along with them, and he's in the subway. He gets beat up by a guy, gets thrown against the wall. It's really short, it's really simple, but it's a lot of fun. It's definitely minor Coen Brothers because, I mean, it is very short. It's not really doing a whole lot, but it's fun. I mean, if you like the Coen Brothers, I would say it's definitely worth watching for like a Coen Brothers completionist. You don't really have to watch the whole film because Paris Je t'aime overall is a very uneven movie. It varies greatly from segment to segment. Like some segments, I would say they have the best segment in the movie, for sure. You can watch the whole film if you're interested. There are some other good ones, but there's a lot of bad ones too. Ranking Paris Je t'aime overall is like a D-tier film. I'll give it a C because the Coen Brothers segment is the best one, and this is a Coen Brothers tier list after all. Next up is The Big Lebowski. The Big Lebowski. The dude is iconic for a reason. This is one of my favorite comedies, and it gets funnier every fucking time I watch it. I've seen The Big Lebowski many times, and it just gets funnier and funnier and funnier. It's endlessly rewatchable. It's one of those things where they say, like, if you could only watch one movie, if you are on a desert island and you could only bring like 3 movies or whatever, The Big Lebowski is a strong contender because it just gets better after every rewatch. Part of the reason why it's so rewatchable is because the actual plot of the movie seems like nonsense at first, but it's really this intricate web of connections between all these disparate characters and all these different things that are happening. What The Big Lebowski really is a great film noir crime story, except you take out the hard-boiled, grizzled detective and you plop the dude in there who has no idea what's going on. He doesn't have a chance in hell of unraveling this crime plot, but it's all in there. The more you rewatch The Big Lebowski, the more it feels like a great film noir that is just turned into a complete farce via the protagonist. I love it. John Goodman's great, Steve Buscemi's great, John Turturro's great. You got the whole Coen Brothers cast of usuals. Philip Seymour Hoffman is so good. I fucking miss PSH, man. I love the guy. Big Lebowski, S tier, easily. Next up is The Man Who Wasn't There. Kind of fitting the title, The Man Who Wasn't There. It's almost like the forgotten Coen Brothers movie for me. It doesn't have a ton of staying power, which is odd because it's a great film, really. It's beautifully shot. It's got a great Billy Bob Thornton performance, a good James Gandolfini performance. It's got a good plot, a good ScarJo performance, too. It just lacks some element of staying power. I think I'm due for a rewatch. I'm going to put it in the B tier for now. I can see it moving up or maybe down. Next up is the Hudsucker Proxy. The Hudsucker Proxy, for no real reason, happened to be the last Coen Brothers film I had left to watch. It was kind of an instance of where I didn't want to run out of Coen Brothers movies, you know? So I kind of held off on watching it for a little while just because I didn't want to run out. But I finally watched it. It is good, but not mind-blowing. I would call it one notch below the Coen Brothers usual standard. It's very good, very funny. The story feels a little more traditional than a lot of their stuff. There is something interesting about taking this corporate world and turning it into a fairy tale, but it definitely feels more mainstream and it feels a lot more studio than a lot of their films. Their most mainstream picture, it had a huge budget. I think it was a bit of a financial loss, and then they kind of went back to more or less doing their own thing. And I think that was what worked out best for their career. Tim Robbins is great, Paul Newman's great, and Jennifer Jason Leigh is also great. Hula hoop thing is a lot funnier if you don't know that it's all building up to a hula hoop. Because he spends the first half of the film going, I have this great different invention, and he keeps showing people it's just a circle. If the trailer and the poster and the synopsis didn't spoil that it's all building up to him making hula hoops, that circle gag is hilarious. When you know it's a hula hoop, it's a little less funny, but it's still very funny in concept. This one has a pretty strong Sam Raimi influence to it. You can kind of feel, because him and the Coen Brothers are friends and they have an interconnected history, interconnected careers. Joel Coen's first thing in the film industry, I think, was he was the assistant editor for Evil Dead, or maybe Evil Dead 2. Hudsucker Proxy, enjoyable, but it has a bit of that mainstream gloss that just kind of takes away from the Coen Brothers' personality, I think. And I think that studio feeling that it has is enough to lower it from a B to a C tier. This is one of the only Coen Brothers movies that I've only seen once because it's the most recent one I watched. I could see it maybe bumping up to a B on a rewatch, but it feels like a C tier for me right now. Next up is Intolerable Cruelty. This is definitely at the bottom end of the Coen Brothers standards. As a Coen Brothers film, it feels awful. As a movie, right? If a different filmmaker made this, you'd be yeah, it was okay. It's kind of middle of the road boring. As a Coen Brothers movie, it feels wow, that was shitty. You know? Because the Coen Brothers are usually so great. By their standards, it's awful. As a movie, it's kind of okay, middle of the road. It's D tier, maybe E tier. Honestly, it's kind of E tier. It's so forgettable. The premise is lame. They're working with George Clooney, who is usually great under their direction, but his character is just so bland. Intolerable Cruelty is, I would say, only worth watching for Coen Brother completionists. It's totally skippable for people who like their movies, regular film lovers. What's not skippable, however, is Fargo. Fargo is fucking great. One of their best easily. I'm not gonna fuck around here. It's S tier, absolutely S tier. It's great, very rewatchable. Steve Buscemi, one of Steve Buscemi's best roles. Frances McDormand, who is Joel Coen's wife, by the way, if you didn't know. She's excellent, one of her best roles. Peter Stormare is excellent. William H. Macy, of course. The whole cast is just great. The wood chipper scene's iconic, but really the whole movie, every scene is just through and through so great. It's a tense, it's a good thriller, but it's also just fucking hilarious. It's one of my favorite black comedies. The Fargo movie also led to the Fargo TV show many years later, and it's one of the best shows on TV. The Fargo TV show is fucking great if you've never seen it. All 4 seasons are great. It's hard to pick a favorite between 2 and 3 for me. They're both great. But honestly, all 4 of them are very, very good. Next up is Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? This one gets a lot of love. Personally, I don't enjoy it quite as much as a lot of people seem to do, but I do think it's great. It's notable as being one of the first films to be digitally color graded, which is important. That's an important step in cinema. Both this film and No Country for Old Men are both notable that they weren't edited on Avid, which if you don't know the BTS stuff, the film industry typically says everything needs to be edited on Avid Media Composer. That's the go-to, that's the industry standard film editing software, but the Coen Brothers said, fuck that, we're going to start using Final Cut, and they just edited in that. That's big. It's big in the mainstreamification of non-industry standard film editing software. Anyway, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? It's a great use of music. It parallels Homer's The Odyssey. It's a great cast. All three leads are just so good together. The whole cast really, like John Goodman's great when he shows up. The whole involvement of the KKK is unexpected on your first watch, and they get a lot of good humor out of it. The soundtrack is really good. Like you can just listen to the Soggy Bottom Boys on their own. They're a lot of fun. I Am a Man of Constant Sorrow will gets in my head just thinking about it. Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Really good. I think a lot of people might put it in A. For me, it's a little more on the B side, so I'm gonna put it in B. The Ballad of Buster Scruggs is the most recent Coen Brothers movie at this point. They are back in Western territory again, which is a lot of fun. Ballad of Buster Scruggs is a vignette film. Vignette films often are a little uneven. I don't think there's a weak link in the Ballad of Buster Scruggs. I think there's tremendous variety between them all, and I enjoy all of them greatly. It seems like there would be some tonal clashing, some tonal inconsistency between like how fun and lighthearted and cartoonish the titular Ballad of Buster Scruggs segment is, with all the singing and dancing and the crazy over-the-top action. It seems like that would clash with like the one called Meal Ticket, where the guy has no arms and legs and Liam Neeson's carting him around and using him, with how somber and dark that one is. It seems like they would clash, but it all works together. Tom Waits as an old-timey prospector, so great. Very enjoyable. I give Ballad of Buster Scruggs an A. And finally, Inside Llewyn Davis. This one is a personal favorite of mine. Again, like some of these other ones, I'm going to not mince words here. I'm going to put it in the S tier. There was a time when I would have put it in the A tier. The first time I watched Inside Llewyn Davis, actually I think the first two times, I loved the story, loved Oscar Isaac's performance, loved the cinematography, and loved the story being told and all the side characters and everything. But the music was like nothing to me. In between those first, I think, two watches and my third watch, I became a huge fan of folk music. I just kind of like discovered a love I had for folk music in between my first two watches and my subsequent watches. And now Inside Llewyn Davis hits me in a whole new way, now that I love folk music so much. Now I will just like listen to this movie's soundtrack. I will watch it just for the music. It's like a flawless film to me now. Everything about it just really hits hard, and I absolutely love Inside Llewyn Davis. If you're a folk music fan, you will love it even more. But even if you like don't give a shit about, the music in the film, I think it's still absolutely worth watching for the performances and for the story being told. Really good stuff. And that's all the Coen Brothers films. You can see they're very clearly clustered up at the top half. Oh, wait a second. Where the fuck is Ladykillers? I don't want to end on a sour note. I would have made sure this one wasn't last. It's often called their worst film. Some people call it their only bad film. I would disagree, and I would say Intolerable Cruelty, which even has a fucking title that is hard to pronounce. Intolerable Cruelty. I would say they're about the same level. I want to put them both in the E tier. Ladykillers is another instance where, as a Coen Brothers film, it's like fucking awful. But if another filmmaker made it, it wouldn't seem as bad. Like, it seems dog shit in comparison to all their other movies. As just a movie, it's not really, like, horrible. There's some enjoyable moments. There's some funny stuff. So that is my ranking of the entire Coen Brothers filmography. They're some of my favorite filmmakers. I think they're, like, the best in the game. They got 5 S-tier films, and they got 5 A-tier films. I can't say that about too many filmmakers. So check out all the Coen Brothers movies you have yet to see. Check out my other tier lists, and make sure you subscribe to Brickwall Pictures for more stuff like this, as well as like video essays, traditional movie reviews, and just whatever other stuff I feel like making.